so, Madam Chair, IT says we are ready to go when we are. We're just waiting for Commissioner Rogers.
Commissioner Willie, are you ready to go? Great. Okay. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Tuesday, February 16th, Washington County Board of Commissioners work session. This is Chair Catherine Harrington, and with us this morning, we have Commissioner Pam Treese, Commissioner Nafisa Fye, and Commissioner Willie so far, and hopefully Commissioner Roy Rogers will be able to join us soon. The first item on the agenda is board communication. Who would like to go first? Nobody. Go ahead, Commissioner Willie.
I don't have much to report. I mean, last week was just kind of a normal week of meetings and preparing for Snowmageddon. And the good news is we didn't lose electricity. And so we're still up and rolling. So yeah, looking forward to this work session.
Great.
I can go next. Last week was, as Commissioner Willie said, I think we were all on pins and needles waiting for the snow to come down. I was so proud of the Washington County LUT department and all the work that they've done, all the communication that went out regarding the road closures, the whole situation. So thank you to them. I know that I had a meeting with Melissa DeLizer on Friday, and I think that poor Melissa was just about ready to explode, but she had a lot of work on her plate. Last week, I had a meeting with 5 mayors and representatives from Washington County Kids regarding daycare. We're just in the process of talking and figuring out what our thoughts are. There's not a whole lot to report at this time other than the conversation went well, and we'll look forward to our second conversation. We also had the PAB board meeting last Thursday night, and that was we were verifying the scoring for the different programs that were in the CDBG and the homes. So that went smoothly as well. Other than that, not a lot to report.
Commissioner Fye, anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, just give me 1 second. My kids are, our childcare is running late, so they're in and out here. Let me kick them out. 1 second.
No worries. I'll just go. You all know that I was on vacation all last week, with the exception of participating in our work session meeting all day on Tuesday. We had an uneventful drive home despite all of the snow and ice on the roads, but it's good to be back. I more or less spent all day yesterday trying to catch up on reading packets and all of the different weekly summary emails we get, and trying to be prepared for this short 4-day work week. So that's it from me. Commissioner Fye.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Last week, I'll be brief as well. Last week was full of discussions of internal county services with, my mission was to fully understand the depth of the county's limitations and the bandwidth to address and alleviate concerns that our constituents have and that they send in. I had a great and a brief conversation with our assessment and taxation leaders, Margaret and Joe. And I was really moved by the caller that we had a couple weeks ago that talked about having to pay business property taxes, even though his business was shut down. And I think we need to explore all of available options to help people I'm planning on meeting with Joe and Margaret to talk more about this. But I'm really interested in figuring out what is in our limits as the government system, because people are stuck between a hard place and a rock. And I think we can try to at least help. And I also had a great conversation with our juvenile justice or juvenile service leaders, Lynn and Jennifer, and learned a lot about our numbers. And I also had a great conversation about major street transportation improvement program. So a lot of internal discussions, good discussions for our constituents and for Washington County. That's all I have.
Great. Well, I'll just close with, here we are, the middle of February already. It's like, holy smokes. 6 weeks has already gone by in this new year. And before we know it, it will be summer. So, wow, time is flying by. And I know we have a lot going on. So why don't we check in with leadership communication? Ms. Angie.
Good morning, Chair Harrington and board. I first want to start with a shout out to the staff team, both LUT, our deputies and others across the organization that really helped ensure that our community was safe throughout this storm. They did work tirelessly. I certainly really appreciated the operational updates from Todd Watkins and his team to help me learn and better understand how we respond to snow emergencies here in Washington County. So I appreciate Commissioner Treese, you giving a shout out to that team too, because they were working around the clock through this week. From a vaccine update, from a workforce standpoint, in cooperation with Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue, the county held its vaccination clinics on Thursday and Friday, despite the weather. Employees did have the option to reschedule their vaccine, but many of our Phase 1A employees are essential workers, so they were on site and present at work. More second round clinics will continue with Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue over the next few weeks to ensure full vaccinations for employees who received the first dose. So that's great progress update. I'm also extremely pleased for the first time in many, many months, we are not aware of any employees who are isolating or quarantined due to COVID-19. And that concludes my update.
Could I ask you a quick question on your update? And it goes towards, I believe, a week or two ago, you mentioned that the virus response team was going to be moving from a 7-day-a-week operation to a 6-day-a-week operation. And I just wanted to double check, has that been instituted? Because I want to make sure that, our employees have been working so hard for a year dealing with this virus, and folks need a break.
So happy to report, Health and Human Services Director Marnie Kyle and team are in the process of making that transition. It will, just from a staffing perspective, it will take a few weeks to implement, but they are moving in that direction. And I should note, today does mark the day that we are offering more in-person services within the county as we've moved from extreme to high risk. I do want to continue to encourage our community members to use virtual or online applications, if at all possible, though.
I've been once again reminded that it takes all hands on deck through all communication channels to help community members, even elected officials, understand the changes that have been made to operational status, as well as guidance for opening operations. So I know I've been pumping out Facebook posts and emails with the new summary chart that is a great one-page at a glance guidance resource. So I want to encourage all of my colleagues to do what you can to get that distributed and understood through our community. Thank you. Alan, how about you? How are things going with legal?
Doing good. We got a favorable decision from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals last week. As a several years old case, Lazier versus Washington County. A few years ago, one of our deputies arrested a man for violating a domestic abuse restraining order. He sued us, and the district court gave summary judgment to him and against us because we did not have probable cause to arrest that gentleman. We thought that was a terrible decision, completely wrong, and we appealed it. And the Court of Appeals agreed with us and said, yes, we did have probable cause and we were qualified immunity. And there'll be a update later this week for the whole board, so they can get a chance to look at that and ask questions. So other than that, some of my staff are hamstrung because of without power, but we'll get by. So thank you. That's it.
How's the recruitment going? I seem to recall that you had an open recruitment for one of your replacements, as well as starting the process on the new positions.
We have interviews this week, so hopefully we'll find something.
Great, good. Well, it's nice to have the buildings open with internet and heat, so yes, folks can get away from their very cold homes during this challenging time. So, but you know, for those who have children, it's really hard. What do? You know, so everybody's getting through. Good job. Diane, Clean Water Services, you and your team sent us a great update, email update last night or this morning. So what's new with your shop?
Thank you, Chair Harrington, and good morning, Board of Clean Water Services. I hope that the storm response update was really helpful. For the public, I want them to all know that Clean Water Services had been investing since 1990s to keep our electrical systems with either dual feeds or the ability to have generators on all of our pump stations. The treatment plants are also outfitted with dual feeds, which means the electricity is fed by two separate substations. And this helps us to provide some stability. And we're real fortunate that in this region, the substations did well. So the grid had some power bumps. It was a little bumpy there for the team, but they were able to restore and maintain all of the equipment. We are dispatched this morning to manage some high flows in the Aloha area. So we're keeping track of that. I think it's some of the melt that occurred, but everywhere else in the system, we're looking good. We have a product that comes out of the treatment plant called Biosolids, and we take the biosolids as fertilizer to farm fields in Eastern Oregon. And the closure of I-84 meant that we needed to have storage capability here in the region, and the team did a really good job. And in fact, there were some maintenance that was done in the past year that was able to allow us to have an extra digester during the winter to help with the storage. So the team's done really great anticipatory work. I'm very proud of them and for all the work that they did, both the field crews and the treatment plant and the lab and everyone. They all rallied together to do their pre-planning and they executed really well during the storm. We do have 2 employees who are married and they have a household member that is positive for COVID. So we are supporting those 2 team members. They will be getting tested the 17th. So we should be getting some data from them today. The storm delayed their testing, but we're supporting them and helping them with strategies in their household to keep everybody safe and secure. So they're working on this and we wish them well. Other than that, we have an award from APWA a little bit later on one of our projects. So thank you, board, and we appreciate your support.
Good morning, Commissioner Rogers. Is there anything as part of the communications segment that you would like to share?
Can you hear me at all?
Yes.
I can't hear you at all. My IT got everything black in front of me other than I can just barely see you. So nothing to report, but I'll try to hear the best I can. I'm getting about this much sound. Oh, okay. Thank you.
So next we're on formal agenda item before we go to that, I have a question for Ms. Angie. I think I know the answer, but this week is on Thursday a JPAC meeting where they're reviewing the Regional Emergency Transportation Route Program. And that was highlighted to us as part of the Friday facts that we get. Usually our team participates through the Technical Policy Advisory Committee, TPAC. So I just wanted to check and ask, how did LUT participate in that? Just to make sure there's the connection, because the Friday fact highlight to us doesn't give any indication of that. So I'll just raise the question and hopefully we can hear back from that another time. It will be reviewed at MPAC on the 24th. So heads up to Commissioner Treese on that. So, all right, on the formal agenda, are there any questions on today's formal agenda? I know I have a comment and a couple of questions myself. I wanted to see if my colleagues have any questions first. No? Okay. Let's see. First, let me find, oh, here it is. Sorry about that. On the consent agenda, first, my comment is on item A under Clean Water Services for the contract to construct the Durham Lime System Modifications Project. Diane, I just want to give real kudos. The agenda sheet for that was very informative, and I really appreciate the work that Nate Cullen and his team put into that. Then down in support services, there are two items on the consent agenda. The first one, to accept the proposal and authorize a contract for environmental engineering services. And my question is, how is equity taken into account? And I know I sent an email off to Ms. Angie yesterday, so just wanted to share that question with all commissioners and hear if you might have any status before our 10 o'clock meeting today.
Thank you for that question, Chair Harrington. Latricia Tillman and her team, part of the work ahead on her strategic action plan is looking at our procurement processes. And I use procurement versus purchasing very intentionally, and also ensuring that we are using an equity lens in that process. So at this point, we don't have the systems and structures in place. However, that is on the work plan moving forward.
Well, since I sent that email to you yesterday, what I know we did at Metro is in cases like this where we have these master contract agreements, rather than having that continued, it's like a 1 year or 2 year contract with an extension provision of another 2 years. Remove that extension so that we go through the process again to include the equity procurement new rules for the reapplication. So I'm related to this item, I'm seriously wondering about that. Otherwise, we end up in a situation where, despite our having new policies in place and new rules in place, it takes a whole generation, 10 years to 20 years to get change in place. So what do you recommend?
So let me sidebar with the team prior to the board meeting and see if we can have an amendment to that, which would limit the time without automatic renewals.
What we may end up needing to do is pull it from today's consent agenda in order to have a week or two of time to do that checkpointing. But
I will take this as a comment to just visit with the department directors to take this into consideration as we bring contracts forward in the future as well.
Yep. We adopted the equity resolution a year ago almost. So by now, all of the departments should be thinking about how that gets operationalized. So then the second item was also under support services, accepting the federal emergency rental assistance funding. This is more of, I asked a question and got some information from staff. So the grant is for almost $18 million. And the action today is to authorize the $10 million apportionment to community action. So that's important. We need to get those dollars out as swiftly as possible. But the staff is continuing to do the next steps for getting the remaining almost $8 million out to the field. But more time is needed on that. Staff was, there are reasons why staff didn't communicate that to us in this agenda sheet for this packet. But at the same time, we need to have a process by which they can communicate intentions to us for the remaining dollars. Ms. Angie, is there more that you'd like to share on this?
So I would suggest that the board consider this phase one of the deployment of the dollars, the 10 million to community action, and then we will be updating the board as we develop the next steps.
Yep, so good learning for next time to make sure that's clear. Great. Are there any other noted questions or comments on today's formal agenda? Nope, okay, we'll move on. I see that Commissioner Roy Rogers has dropped off for a few minutes and hopefully he'll be back in a bit.
Yes, he is trying to work on that, Madam Chair.
Yeah, technology challenges, not unusual at this stage of the game. Let's see, I did have, okay, yep. All righty. So unless anyone has anything else, we'll move on to the next item on the work session agenda. Is everybody all set? We'll move on to the legislative update. Hello, Commissioner Rogers. Can you hear us this time? Okay, great, great. Commissioner Rogers, I covered a couple of items on the consent agenda. Did you have any questions on today's formal agenda?
No, I do not. Thank you.
Okay, great. All right. Sorry for that interlude. Now we'll turn it over to our government relations team. Take it away, Jagjit and company.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Harrington. Can everybody hear me and see me okay? Just give me a thumbs up. Perfect. A really small thumbs up because you're all tiny on my screen. So good morning, Chair Harrington and commissioners. For the record, my name is Jagjit Nagra, Government Relations Manager for Washington County. Today, I'm joined by the full complement of the county's government relations team, so myself, Erin Doyle, and Paige Spence, along with our Chief Equity and Diversity Officer, Latricia Tillman. You'll be hearing from each of us. There's a lot to cover today in 60 minutes, so if we can move on to the next slide, and we'll talk a bit about the agenda. Thank you. So at the outset of today's conversation, we're going to talk, Erin, you're going to hear from Erin Doyle. She's going to provide an update on our COVID assistance communications. This is a bit of a retrospective in the sense that we're looking at and sharing the good stories and work that we did as a county in terms of our CRF deployments. Next, I'll be talking about and checking in with the board to see if they're comfortable with the level of communication found in our bill tracker report. Then we'll be pivoting to state legislative session timeline. There's 4 key dates here I want to share with the board. And really the bulk of our conversation, the meat on the bone, if you will be the next portion, which is this substantive portion. This is the ups in respect to their portfolios of work that's going on at the state legislature. And finally, and I'm really excited about this because this is new and exciting, we are going to have a conversation led by Latricia Tillman around equity focus within the legislative analysis. And then I'll go over a few of the bills that the state legislature is discussing that both have impacts to the county and the communities that we serve. So with that, we'll get right underway, and I will turn it over to Erin.
Good morning, everyone. Jajit kind of froze there, so I'm assuming it's been kicked over to me. We just wanted to provide a quick update about some of the work that I am coordinating with our communications team on and the finance team on related to ongoing attempts to increase the amount of COVID funding available from the federal government, and then what we're going to do to report back on what we've done with the assistance that we've received so far. So briefly, government relations has been coordinating with our communications team to record a number of videos. They were recorded late last week, and we're now going through them to create a persuasive social media campaign directed at primarily the federal legislature, but also the community and state government partners to push for the passage of direct county relief in the American Rescue Plan. That we're hoping to push those out as quickly as possible, given what's happening at the federal level as they're moving relatively quickly. But what we're trying to do is get into the hands of our delegation who already supports us, the resources they need to convince their colleagues to vote yes to provide that local government direct assistance. In addition, I am coordinating with Jack and his team, as well as Philip and his team, to put together a report for you and for the community on how we have used the coronavirus relief fund dollars that we received last year. That will be coming to you at your March 16th meeting. So you'll see a presentation of what we are tentatively calling the storybook of what we have done with the CRF program across the county. And with that, I will return the presentation back over to Jajit unless you have questions.
Okay, thank you, Erin. Seeing no questions, we can move to the next slide. So, Chair Harrington, Commissioners, I'm hoping you're looking at something that is familiar to you at this point. What this is an expanded or exploded view of one of our bill tracker items on a particular bill. Here we're looking at 2002. And the reason I'm sharing this with you is because I want to do a quick check-in. We're expecting 3,000 to 4,000 bills this legislative session. Each GR
Can't hear you.
Our manager is managing about one captured in the bill tracker report that are really highly distilled summaries, the bills that we think are sort of the most important in this moment. And so with that, I just want to do a quick check-in, since this is an axiomatic communication tool for us in regard to bills, the state legislature and the board, is if this is working for you. So I'll just quickly turn it over to you. I know a couple of us have talked about this. Commissioner Willie, you and I checked in about this bill report earlier this week. But I just want to turn it over to the board to see if this is working for you, if there's anything we can improve for you in the spirit of continuous improvement.
Commissioners, do you have any requests? I'll say, Jagjeet, I think it would be, given that this is our first check-in for the beginning of the legislative session, you know, we had adopted the legislative agenda, and now things are proceeding with the session. If we could just recap what tools are available to us. So we have that legislative agenda, and we have bill tracker, which gives us the whole comprehensive set of all the bills and all the status that you're providing to us. There are two sort of subsets out of that I know I need better clarity on. The first is those bills that we in Washington County have asked our legislators to either sponsor for us or move on for us specifically. And that is a subset that I don't care what resource we have for that, what type of tool, but at a minimum for a a beginning of session update, we need to have that inventory. What I don't want to have happen again is to have the legislative season start off and for me to once again be getting constituent calls about a bill that supposedly Washington County has asked a legislator to sponsor on our behalf. Something about the tools that were available to me didn't make that easily discernible. The second is it's great that there is this comprehensive bill tracker that you all are putting updated information in. But it's a little arduous to expect us every week or two to be able to go through that and detect what has changed since the last time. You know, we have to go through the many, many pages to try and figure out what changed since the last time. So if there is another way for someone to just produce a list that also says, just check on these ones for updated status or something, I think that would be most effective for all 5 of us to move forward with. So fundamentally, the system that you have with using Bill Tracker and how you have the date updates and these short paragraphs is wonderful information. I think it's been very informative just over these last couple of weeks of using it. And I appreciate the work that you're all putting into that.
Thank you, Chair Harrington. This is exactly the type of feedback I was looking for. And so what we will do is we will figure out a better vehicle or mechanism to highlight the bills that are led and sponsored by the county. And then also we'll figure out a way to make it a little bit more clean in terms of the updates of the bills. One comment I will say on that is that if you look at the paragraph section that's preceded by a date on this particular exploded view, it says February 2nd, right? When those notes are updated, meaning there's a change from one week to another, you'll see another date category. I realize that's probably not the most clear way to go about it. And so we'll work on that. And I really appreciate the feedback, Chair.
Well, it just means I have to go through and I have to remember, okay, was the last bill tracker last week or 2 weeks ago? And so exactly. which date sequence should I be checking? So, it could just be that in the email that you send us in providing us the bill tracker, just the reminder that maybe the last time we got one was date X, right? And so look for anything that follows date X, right?
That's a great suggestion.
And then overall process-wise, before a new session begins, I think it would be better for us to have, in parallel to working on the legislative agenda, have that list of what are those topics, right? You won't have bill numbers yet, but what are those topics that the departments are asking the board to approve for moving forward as bill requests? Whether it's an issue sheet or something that we work on. And I totally understand that some of these requests are going to be for action that legislative session, and then there are going to be others where the first session introduces the request, right? And then the next session, it makes further progress. So I think you and the team members, Paige, Aaron, yourself, are putting in these very useful systems for us. And I really appreciate all the work you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We are very much, as they say, flying the ship as we build it, right? So
I'd like to tag on to that too, because I think that's apropos to my comments. We know every session there's going to be 3,000, 4,000 bills. We understand that a lot of those are never going to see the light of day. So if there was some way that we could take a look at what you see advancing instead of spending a lot of effort and time on things that probably are not going to go forward. And I know that's a hard task. More specifically, my comments are, there are bills in here that you have outlined that have specific implications to not only the chair, who is countywide, but district commissioners, i.e. in my particular district, there are people who are saying, gee, how do we get out of the urban reserves? And how do we do this or how do we do that? I don't know who those people are. And I think it has specific implications to certain cities who aren't going to be happy if they think that that's something that they, through Metro, have brought in, and now people are trying to parcel those out. I may be reading it wrong, but it looks like that. And there's also particular bills and in the work systems area where they're asking to have certain things done. And I would hope that they would actively engage people like Andrew McGough and others in that formation. Plus another bill I saw that said that they want 1,000 jobs in certain areas. Well, I fail to see why you want to create new agencies or new activities when you have a work system group. I'm not necessarily board members, that's for sure, but I mean, it was staff who can do those tasks. So to replicate things, it doesn't sound like a real good idea. So what I'm asking is there a way that if there are, I know there's countywide things, but if there are district specific, that you could highlight those so that people, for instance, like me, when the one I was pointing out, I can go to a Tigard or a King City and say, do you know that that bill has, because they don't always have lobbying folks, has specific implications, and you ought to be aware. Whatever you do with it, that's up to you, but at least you're aware. Or in work systems, that we can send that back either through myself as a representative of the board or any of our folks who are serving Washington County on that board, that they could say, let's pay attention to that. There's something there that's going to cause us to either be very happy, very sad, or very neutral, but there's something we, at least be aware of. So long-winded way to say, it'd be nice to parse it out. So I'm not looking at 3,000 things and saying, yikes, what should I be concerned about?
Thank you, Commissioner. So, one of the things in the bill tracker report, right, we only have, I think, about 20 or so bills. That's where I was kind of getting at, that highly distilled summary. And I'm hoping that's still not too much either. We're really trying to have that balancing act of not overburdening the commissioners. And so we'll try to do a better job on that, and with the issues, we'll definitely work on that. So thank you for that feedback. Are there any other commissioners who wanted to chat about this? You're very small on my screen, and so I'm struggling to see you.
Commissioner Treese is giving you a thumbs up. I appreciated your summarizing approximately how many bills are in that, because as I started to read the updated one, I was like, wait a second. I know I just went through this the other day, or, a week or so ago, and I was like, wow, look at all these pages. So it is good to hear approximately how many are in that report you're giving us. Yes. I don't expect you that we need you to focus on those things that we as an agency are requesting or are actively participating in with others, whether it's to support or to oppose. Then there is another category of things where others are taking the lead on, and we're just participating because it would be good for us, but we're not asking you to spread your limited resources to do that on our behalf. It's like we're supporting it in name. But we don't expect our government relations team to be the resource to answer for those thousands of bills. That's what OLIS is for. And yes, there are questions, but we just have to navigate through that there are all kinds of folks, constituents, businesses, legislators who are sponsoring bills, requesting all kinds of things. We also know that there are some big themes in the legislative session. And I know you're about to summarize some of that for us and let us know what affects us. So I think what you're hearing is it's the bill tracker summary that you all provide to us is very useful, and we appreciate that. So thank you. So I think we can move on.
Okay, sorry, I'm having some connectivity issues here. Thank you, board, for that feedback. We really do appreciate it. If we can move to the next slide. So I just want to go over 4 key dates here. February 23rd is our upcoming bill introduction deadline for most members. Folks like the Speaker of the House, of course, are immune to this deadline. Government Relations is very much looking forward to this deadline. February 24th is the revenue forecast. Some of you might have seen the Oregonian article a week or so ago talking about the $1.6, $1.7 billion with a B shortfall at the state legislature, revenue shortfall. And so I'm very much anticipating this revenue forecast, considering that many of our legislative priorities are fiscal asks. And so this is something that's certainly going to be an enlightening conversation. Having said that, the American Rescue Plan from the feds is supposed to give 65% of the local dollars to the state. And so I'm hoping some of those funds, assuming they get appropriated by our congressional partners, can help backfill this void. March 19th is the upcoming deadline for the first chamber to schedule a work session for a bill. Reminder, if that scheduling deadline is not met, the bill does not move forward. Further, on April 13th is the deadline for the first chamber to hold a work session for the bill. If that work session is not scheduled or have taken place by that point, I should say, the bill does not move forward. So just things to frame our conversation as we move into the substantive portion. Next slide, please. Chair, did you have a question or was that a thumbs up? I can't see. Okay, I like it. So moving corrections, advocacy here. One, myself, Steve Berger, our Community Corrections Director, worked very closely with the Oregon Association of Community Corrections Director to advance. We worked with Representative Gorsuch, who's the lead sponsor on this, and what this bill does is it provides funding for misdemeanor domestic violence supervision. Now, for those of you who know our community corrections program pretty well, you know that, hey, we do a lot of this work already, but we're not funded for it from the Department of Corrections. Now, when we think about funding certain programs in the community corrections, you'll recall Measure 110 was passed by the voters of Oregon. That took away a certain section of the population that we supervise. And this would help sort of, in a way, help fill the void of that loss of population. But more important than that, this is a best practice. There's a reason why judges want community corrections to have these folks on domestic violence supervision. And so with that, this would create equality across the state. So people are treated the same way and get the same services, but more equally as important, we're being funded for the good work that we do. Next, you'll remember this is a fifth familiar number to the 2020 short session, $25 million for community corrections. We were successful in getting this into the 2020 short session budget bill, but that was a failed session, so we never received the money. And so we are once again making that same request. The amount went up slightly to 25.6. And really the point I want to make here is that let's assume we're successful in getting Senate Bill 497 and this $25 million. In no way do I want the board to think that community corrections is now made whole. Not even close. That is to keep us afloat, to put it lightly. We need the community corrections to create the actual cost study and the funding formula and really the quagmire as to why we're in this situation. Because in the end of 2023, with this, assuming we get these funds, we're going to be right back at the bargaining table asking for money again, and that's a situation I'd like to avoid. So that's the update with community corrections. I'll pause there for any questions. Okay, moving on to law library and conciliation. In Law Library, we're working with our coalition partners. We're working with the Oregon Judicial Department, along with the Chief Justice, AOC, and some sister counties. This is, again, a two-pronged approach. We have a fiscal ask that'll be coming and developing more as we get to the budgetary section of this legislative session, but we also need to work on defining what law library services are. Now, here's an interesting piece of information. Although counties are mandated to provide law library services, there's actually no definition of what law library services are in statute. And so reasonable legislators have asked me, boy, Jagjit, you're asking for this money. We know your folks want it, the county, your constituents, but we don't have a definition. So how could we know what to fund you at? I think that's a reasonable question. And so we're going to be working on that as well. In conciliation, this is again, another budget request that we're going to be making, and we'll have more headway in this conversation as we progress through session. So with that, I will move on to the next slide unless there are any questions. Great, thank you. So our next slide I'm going to be brief here in terms of hot topics. I think for my portfolio, I cover general government and public safety. Even a casual observer of the Oregon State Legislature knows that public safety is truly the hot topic for this legislature in many ways. Also, I would argue that bills related to equity and transparency writ large are hot topic items. You know, when it comes to our sheriff's department and our DAs, a lot of these public safety reform bills are going to have pretty sizable direct impacts on those two agencies, assuming the bills pass as currently drafted. And so I imagine you'll continue to hear from our sheriff and from our DA. I'm in close communication and coordination with both of those offices in terms of these bills. And big shout out to our county council, who's doing a fantastic job with our bill reviews. We're adding to their workload, but really appreciate it. You know, broad strokes in public safety, what I see is that there's a push for transparency, accountability, removing bad actors from the public safety system, and then of course a focus on equity and outcomes. In general government, you know, every session we see a host of public records bills, and we also are seeing, you know, we see a smattering of property tax related bills. The reason I bring up the property tax piece is just because there seems to be more of a momentum. Commissioner Jayapal from Multnomah County seems very emboldened to take strong action on this, and Washington County will certainly be at the table if those conversations provide to be fruitful. So I'll pause there for, yes, Chair Harrington?
Yes, I do have a question here, and I think it applies to the previous slide as well. It would be great in these, you know, summary listings for presentations like this, if we had a nomenclature on each of these categories, like one, as in most important, number one, this is an area that we have asked to move forward. Two is we've asked and we're partnering with others because it affects more than just us, right? Other counties, for example. And then three, it's where we are involved, but aren't the, you know, it's not an area that we, the board, have approved from department requests, but others are the champions for it.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for flagging that. We will do a better job of including that. What I can say about these three, though, just to put a bow on it quickly, is that we are in the number one category.
Great, thank you. Perfect, thank you.
We are moving these forward. As you recall, these are our legislative priorities. So if we can actually move to slide number 8 now, and I will turn it over to Paige Spence.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jagjit, and good morning, Chair Harrington and Commissioners. For the record, yes, I am Paige Spence, and I will discuss the Health and Human Services Department, or HHS, and the Housing Authority of Washington County, or HAWC, trying to demystify these acronyms here, the legislative priorities adopted by your board, as well as some other issues of interest. So first, I'd like to talk about Health and Human Services. So to the first bullet point here on funding our existing programs, you'll recall that unfortunately we are facing a cuts budget. So what we are really advocating for this session is what the state defines as current service level across HHS programs, particularly in focusing on public health, behavioral health, older adults, and people with disabilities. The budget conversation really begins to coalesce in the latter half of session. So for today, I just wanted to mention that our public health division manager, Tricia Mortel, expertly testified last week to advocate for robust funding for public health modernization and universally offered home visiting, which are two of your board's adopted priorities. The second bullet here, I have to apologize for the typo. The hearing is tomorrow, not today, but this is the Senate Bill 587 for statewide tobacco retail licensure. And I've been working with our tobacco prevention coordinator here at Washington County, Gwen Ashcombe, to prepare both oral and written testimony for that hearing in the Senate Healthcare Committee tomorrow afternoon. And I want to recognize Commissioner Fye for your previous work on licensure, and so I'll be sure to let you know how that hearing goes tomorrow. And the third bullet, straddling our HHS and equity work, so you'll hear this bill again when we turn to the equity portion of our conversation today, is House Bill 2760, which requires the Oregon Health Authority to work with what are called regional health equity coalitions and groups utilizing health equity models throughout the state. These regional health equity coalitions and models are collaborative, community-led, cross-sector groups organized within local communities to identify and address health equity issues, prioritizing communities of color. So that's a very exciting concept. Any questions on HHS before, sorry, Health and Human Services? Okay, great. Turning to our housing authorities work. So the first bullet point here around ensuring housing stability. We are looking to provide resources to folks facing evictions or foreclosures after being unable to pay rent or mortgage after losing their job in the pandemic. We know that having stable housing, a place to self-isolate, is a public health issue too these days. There are several policies being discussed currently, including eviction mediation, long-term rent assistance, and a reinstated foreclosure moratorium with foreclosure counseling. And Washington County is at the table for these beginning but robust conversations, so we'll keep you updated there. And housing stability means housing supply. So there are budget items which Washington County is advocating for. One is to help maintain all regulated multifamily affordable housing, including our public housing. And then the second is to increase our supply of affordable housing across Oregon through what's called the Local Innovation and Fast Track, or LIFT, housing program. And then moving to the second bullet point here of addressing homelessness. Across Oregon, we have a statewide system to distribute emergency rent assistance, rapid rehousing resources, and emergency shelter support through two state agency programs. And for 2021, a coalition is calling for the legislature to commit $50 million between these two programs, and Washington County is supporting this ask. Next slide, please. Great. Now for a very quick look at a few hot topics. So for Health and Human Services, these hearing dates are not typos, but we submitted this presentation prior to committees being canceled yesterday and today due to weather and many folks being without power and unable to participate in our democratic process. So these hearings will be rescheduled, not to worry. First, Senate Bill 582 is emerging as the vehicle to improve Oregon's recycling system. This is a Department of Environmental Quality bill drafted after a 2-year stakeholder process, including local government. And our Solid Waste and Recycling Division of Health and Human Services strongly supports this concept to ensure materials actually get recycled when our residents take them to the curb and think they're going to. And we expect that ratepayers will be protected from any changes, but that is a principle that we're making sure to advocate for as the bill moves forward. Second, House Bill 3037 was introduced by our partners at Multnomah County, but Brad Anderson and our county council office helped draft this bill. This will enable our region's medical examiner offices to share limited information when a young person tragically dies by suicide. So that, for example, a teen lives and goes to school in Washington County, but dies in Multnomah County, that the Multnomah County medical examiner can share that information with Washington County Mental Health, so that our behavioral health team may go in and do some post-vention work in that teen's school or other settings as appropriate. And finally, under the Housing Authority bullet point here, and I put this bill here because many of the folks that our mental health crisis teams respond to are experiencing homelessness or housing instability. So this is the bill that really straddles many areas of our work, and it relates to crisis assistance helping out on the streets, also called CAHOOTS, statewide. I know most of you are familiar with this topic, and here at Washington County, we do use a model that is a partnership between law enforcement and our mental health response teams. So we have some questions around the funding mechanism for this bill, whether or not it would take revenue away from existing behavioral health programs here at Washington County, and also just how to put in place a model for such complex intervention work, with statewide and urban and rural areas in different settings and in different jurisdictions. So we're supportive of the concept, but following this one closely because the devil's in the details. And then with that, I am concluding my presentation and ready to take Chair Harrington's questions.
Thank you. Just trying to be efficient with everyone's time. Ms. Angie, I could use a little bit of help. I haven't been able to find something efficiently yet for the last few weeks of looking. I seem to recall that, I think it was back in December when we, the commission, were coming to a conclusion on body-worn camera, that the HHS team, I think it was Kristen Burke, gave us a really good presentation on behavioral health service support in Washington County. I'm having trouble finding that presentation and what date that was in. And I think that's really useful information for us to propagate further amongst our local government partners, as well as our Washington County State Legislative Delegation, because our agency is doing good work. Cahoots is a good model, but there are other models as well. But I haven't been able to put my fingers on it. So it's time for me to ask for help. So this presentation, thank you, Paige, was a good reminder for me that I needed to ask for that help. Thank you.
And thanks for bringing that up, Chair. Yes, as you mentioned, there are other great models as well. So we're just looking at the details on what's being proposed here. And I am finished with my formal presentation. Unless there are questions, I'm happy to have the next slide be turned over, please, and turn it over to my colleague.
Good morning again, everyone. The two priorities in my portfolio area are related to workforce, making sure our workforce is ready to return to work and has workforce development boards like Work Systems Inc. have the resources they need and the ability to be agile to meet the needs of the workforce related to not just COVID recovery, but generally being able to help encourage our workforce to meet the demands of the jobs that are available here in Washington County. As part of that effort, I have been working with Andrew McGaugh from Work Systems Inc. on advocacy related to Senate Bill 623, which they are calling the COVID Recovery and Workforce Modernization Act. Essentially, it puts in the hands of the regional workforce boards the ability to create programs using the funds that would normally go into workforce boards to make locally and regionally significant programs, reports back to the governor's office for a work system plan, essentially, that is specific to the needs of the region. We've been supportive of this because it would mean Work Systems Inc. convenes local partners in this area to rapidly respond and tailor the programs to the needs of the Portland or the Multnomah County and Washington County work systems needs, as opposed to trying to do the same program statewide, which is less efficient. So basically it increases efficiency and makes the decisions local, which we have approved. And so Washington County is working as part of a coalition on this. We have put our logo on the magic logo sheet that everyone loves to create, and have been talking with our other county partners. And I believe AOC is also on board on this with this now. In the transportation world, we wrote a generalized legislative priority that is making sure that equity is the centerpiece of transportation decisions, which will come up later in the presentation, but also that the agreement struck in 2017, in House Bill 2017, that created resources for transportation system improvements meet those obligations. So turning to House Bill 3055, this is a really long bill, but the one key component that we're concentrating on is related to the tolling provisions. ODOT came in with what they said were some technical changes to the way the tolling provisions were laid out in order to meet the recommendations of their bond counsel in order to be able to bond against future tolling revenues to pay for projects. However, in doing that, they deleted all of the words related to congestion management or congestion relief, which of course caused some consternation for our regional partners, as that's a major important component to what we're trying to do with tolling. It's not just revenue raising, it is also congestion management. We as Washington County are coming to the table with our regional partners and ODOT to fix that language to bring congestion management back in. We believe that sits within our priorities that we're establishing, that we need to continue to work the bottlenecks related to House Bill 2017 on I-205, I-5, and make sure that the resources are available to do both meeting the demands, and also paying for the infrastructure. So those dual goals need to continue to appear in that conversation. And Representative McLean is very engaged in this issue, and she's also one of Washington County's caucus members, and she's very excited to make sure that we're at the table, and we are. The other two bills, House Bill 2744 and House Bill 2515, are both raised more for situational awareness, where we might work with some partners if we need to moving forward. 2744 is one where Metro has kind of already done the work that's being called for, where they're doing a statewide study of all state-owned facilities that have the potential for jurisdictional transfer. What would be more interesting to Washington County, and is this position we are taking, is instead of studying these things further, perhaps we should fund them. So that we can get some of our major already identified priority areas for jurisdictional transfer up to the standards that we need, so that we can then take them over from the state. 2515 is specific to Hall Boulevard. We believe this bill is merely a placeholder because as it's written, it would transfer the entirety of Hall Boulevard to Tigard, which I don't think is Tigard's intention. It was brought at Tigard's request. We're fine if they transfer the Tigard portion of Hall Boulevard, but more thought needs to go into how that impacts the available funding to do all the other jurisdictional transfers that have been moving forward at the pace they do. So that is what we're working on primarily in the transportation world. If there are no questions on this slide, I will move us to the next one. So these are more of the hot topics in the economic development and land use world. So I placed all the prevailing wage bills here. You've seen them in the last 2 weekly memos. They've come up not because it's anything that Washington County is actively engaged in or has been at the table or making any policy statements around, but that the Association of Oregon Counties had a statement of position that then got switched at a board meeting. So I'm just reminding you here that these bills are bills that we are watching. AOC's official position is now that they are neutral on these bills, and therefore they will not be engaging in the legislative process around any of the prevailing wage bills. There is no current work group that is planned for discussing how prevailing wage is either calculated or implemented, or projects it's implemented on. Right now, staff is looking into what the potential impacts would be, both to the costs for our capital or infrastructure projects, but also our workforce goals. If the county decides to engage on these issues, we would be doing it as Washington County. And there are other local governments that are working on these issues through the League of Oregon Cities and Cities. But right now, each county is on its own to determine if it wants to take a position or give a direction, and that would be a board decision. And I will leave it at that on prevailing wage for you guys to have that discussion if that's a direction you want to send me in either direction. The reserve designations, I think we heard a little bit about some consternation about how these bills were brought forward and reported back to. So I do want to first state that there was an intention to get it out there earlier, but there were some it was an LC concept. And then we did not have our January check-in in front of the board because of time constraints on the calendar. So I do apologize for not having been written about House Bill 2837. This is a bill that Washington County staff has put forward because it is a highly technical but very necessary minor change to the reserves designations along Southwest Roy Rogers. There was a technical issue in how things were mapped related to designating a parcel as rural reserves. Its underlying mapping included a small private lane that runs against a number of properties that are rural undesignated and across the street and nearby to other urban reserve areas. So we are redesignating that small section of the road. So the pole in the flagpole, as I'm calling it these days, To rural undesignated. We are not increasing the urban development expectations. What we are trying to do is be able to set ourselves up to do the long-term transportation plan along the Southwest Roy Rogers corridor and for Tile Flat Road and Bull Mountain, I think, yes, Bull Mountain, so that we make sure that as that urban development occurs where it is designated to do via the reserves process, we can plan across that intersection with LASIK lane. So it's a very technical bill. We have gotten sign off from Metro. We believe Thousand Friends is at least neutral. We know that some property owners have reached out to commissioners about this issue. Their issue is not related to the designation of LASIK lane. It is about the designation of their own property, and LUT staff is now answering their technical questions. There is no intention to change the level of development that was allowed under the reserves process. It is merely allowing us to do our long-term transportation planning. However, House Bill 2832 would make some fundamental shifts to the reserves designations in more areas than we think they originally intended to. This was brought as a property owner request to a legislator. That legislator dropped the bill, but it's unclear to me that there's any momentum behind actually making fundamental policy changes related to reserve designations and the amount of development that can occur in areas. I see Chair Harrington has her hand up.
But I want to make sure it's clear that given our legislative principles that we oppose House Bill 2832.
That is my understanding and the direction that I've been working off of. However, I try not to engage on bills that I hope will just die under their own weight, but I have made comments to Rep. Solomon and to staff members as necessary, as well as our partners on those issues such as Metro. Any other questions related to those reserve designations? And if you would like, I do have a pretty new one-pager that Sherry Gerald of the CAO's office made some significant improvements to what I originally provided that can provide you more information about the LASIK lane update. If you're interested, I'll make sure you have it.
I'll just say, Ms. Angie, for future legislative cycles, just reinforcing we are one agency. The board is the political arm. And so any technical bills still need to get a thumbs up request from the board.
I understand that, Chair Harrington.
Let's
and
keep
I do
going now.
apologize.
Any other
final
commissioner questions so far? Commissioner Rogers, you had your hand up for some reason, I thought. Can you shake your head yes or no, Commissioner Rogers? No. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Erin. Let's move on.
The last bill, and I'm just, this is a reminder of a bill that came up in the 2020 session that did not move forward because of the walkout. House Bill 2006 is a temporary, essentially, I call it super siting, not to be too political about it, but it is basically if the shelter request meets certain requirements and is in areas that are designated under the terms of the bill, that it is a non-discretionary decision by the local government to allow for siting of that emergency shelter. We worked on this bill, Paige and I, last year to make sure it met technical needs. It has a political oomph, but this is here again for situational awareness that this is something that folks might be bringing to you. AOC is not engaging, LOC has engaged in the process, and many cities are now comfortable with the bill. So we also remain neutral as to the policy here.
Okay. In completing the land use category, Erin, I need a little further information about that bill with regard to, well, it's not a bill, it's the House, I think it's House Bill 2001 from prior sessions and the rules. Your bill tracker talks about how the cities want changes for duplexes and whatnot. And I need to understand the whys and what fors and what is that really helping? So it's not with, so outside of this meeting, I need either to talk with you or someone in LUT to better understand that.
I will do a follow-up and make sure you get the information you need. Thank you, Chair Harrington. And that's House Bill 2283 for folks.
Erin, this is Roy. I don't need any additional information other than I'd like that 2837, that new updated one that you have. And on
Yeah.
2032, I'm still a little perplexed whether it's just one owner or several. I don't know the impact of trying to undo what we all did previously. So could you send the latest on that to me? So
yeah, I will say that it's not really clear, and they tried to put sideboards to target one property, but it's distinctly possible that they hit more than one with that. So I don't know that we know the full extent to the impact of 2832, but I'll get you the best information I have.
Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I will turn it over now to Latricia to provide some information about how we are including equity into our process, and ask that the next slide be put up. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair Harrington and commissioners. For the record, my name is Latricia Tillman, and I'm the Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer. So the Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement and Government Relations are co-located whenever we get back to work in the office. And as we both operate under the County Administrator's Office, we are leaning into opportunities for much closer alignment and coordination between our two teams, centering equity in our legislative analysis. So given that collaboration, we wanted to draw your attention today and in future updates to legislative bills that specifically call out equity and racial justice, so that you're aware of how public policy is shifting to address longstanding inequities and to change processes for how public policy moves forward in Salem. Some of these bills may align with your specific legislative priorities. However, primarily this update is for situational awareness today. I'm going to provide a brief overview of the themes of the legislation that has called out equity and racial justice, so that you're aware of the broad swath of legislative approaches that promote equity. And then I'll turn it over back to Jagjit to provide more context on equity-focused legislation that may have impact on Washington County. Next slide, please. So we are tracking about 30 bills that specifically call out equity, diversity, inclusion, or racial justice. But there are significantly more pieces of legislation that have or could potentially have an equity impact that may not be explicit in the legislative summary or the legislative language. We expect legislation in future sessions will have more explicit equity impact analysis, particularly if one of the pieces of legislation that Jagjit will speak to more directly gets passed in this session. But you can see the range of themes here of the bills, from looking at the impact of historical racial injustice and oppression, to health equity, to themes related to elections, how we do elections, housing policy, land use and transportation policy, and public safety, as well as economic development. So there's definitely a range of bills. There is a full list of those bills that were provided in your packet for today. And both Jagjit and I are available to talk through any questions you may have about those specific pieces of legislation. Again, there's a lot that we're paying attention to. But at this moment, I'm going to turn it back over to Jagjit, and he will highlight some specific bills that illustrate the range of equity issues that we're tracking this session.
Latricia and Jagjit, you probably, I didn't, oh, I did print this. Okay, it'll be great to hear on March 19th how many bills in these different categories continue to move versus the large array of them today. So thanks. I was just about to ask you to remind me of those dates, and I found the good cheat sheet slide you all put together. Thank you.
Great. So I was going to turn it over to Jagjit to go through the pieces of legislation that we wanted to highlight for you, but I don't see him on the call right now.
I think we lost him.
So maybe I should just carry on and go through the ones that we're specifically calling out. So we could go to the next slide. Okay, there we go. So one of the bills, House Bill 2168, would establish, oh, here comes Jagjit. So I'll talk about this one and then I'll turn it back over to you, Jagjit. 2168 would establish Juneteenth as a state holiday. Obviously, this is specific to the historical impact of and legacy of slavery in the United States. And Juneteenth refers to the date 2 years after the emancipation of enslaved people when notice of their emancipation arrived in Texas. And would establish basically another paid state holiday. So obviously that would have an impact on Washington County. And would have a positive impact on the Black community, African-American community in Oregon that celebrates Juneteenth. Jagjit, I'm going to turn the other ones over to you.
We could, isn't it true that if we wanted to offset the cost of that, we could take President's Day weekend and revert that back to a work day like other agencies, Clean Water Services, and others have done?
Let me follow up on that question, Chair Harrington.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so this is Jagjit once again. Starting with House Bill 2366. This is actually, this bill is both, there's a Senate compatriot as well, just for your information, it's Senate Bill 571. Essentially what these bills would do is they would restore voting rights to about 12,600 prisoners in custody around the state. The bills would also allow the inmates to register to vote in their last place of residence prior to being incarcerated. So this is an interesting concept. Right, as you can imagine, it'll certainly have implications in terms of our elections department. There'll be more people to submitting their ballots if something like this were to be passed. I did a little bit of legislative research. It seems only Vermont, Maine, and the District of Columbia allow all imprisoned felons to keep their right to vote. And so, you know, we wouldn't be the first, but we would certainly be one of the first in this capacity. So that's something to think about. We also might have issues with around language access requirements or translation services with the ballot. The next piece, 2760, and the Senate compatriot, Senate Bill 70. Paige actually did a really good job of talking about these earlier. These are the regional health equity coalitions. And what this bill does is that it establishes in definition what these coalitions are, and it fully funds them, right? To be able to do that sort of collaborative, community-led, working across multiple sector work to really determine not only how to do public health policy, but environmental policy that has disparate impacts on communities of color, how to do that in a community-led, long-term, solution-based manner. So exciting conversation there, excuse me. Next is House Bill 2353 and Senate Bill 2991. This is interesting because this is actually a concept that we, I believe, Chair Harrington, you've actually talked a little bit about loosely at the county. And the notion is broadly, if we're producing a policy or an ordinance or whatever it may be, right? The idea is that we engage in an equity impact analysis. So 2353, what it specifically does is it requires agencies in rulemaking notice statements to identify how that policy affects racial equity. Then the analog in terms of bills is that 2991 requires legislative policy research directors or the chief sponsor of the bill or the proposed constitutional amendment. So, you know, it's certainly I think, a very interesting and comprehensive way to approach how we're going to be moving forward with novel policies. And best practices certainly indicate that this is something we may want to consider as a county as well. So just flagging it for situational awareness. Finally, in the transportation world, we talk about STIP and STIF a lot. You know, Director Roberts, I hear him say these acronyms all the time, and Aaron Doyle as well. And so HB 2917, what this would do is that in the selection criteria for STIP, which is the statewide transportation improvement program, and the Connect Oregon program, is that there's a consideration of whether that proposed transportation project may result in negatively impacting underserved communities. So again, thinking about that equity focus, thinking about how are we serving all communities, right? This is a shift in the legislature, and I was really happy to work on this portion of the presentation with Latricia, because I think these themes are not just themes. I think this is really how we're going to advance meaningful policy moving forward with all of these considerations on board. And so with that, I'll turn it back to the board for any questions.
Good overview on this. Commissioners, any questions? Nope. Don't think so. Commissioner Fye?
I don't, I'll try, I guess I'll just say I'll try not to bother the government relations as the new commissioner, not that I know the three of you are extremely busy. Thank you for a great presentation. Way too many bills I agree to track, but seeing your bill tracking spreadsheet, you're doing a great job. What I'm about to say next could be a comment or a question, but it has to do with wanting to engage in a dialogue with the rest of the board in the future on how we decide bills to support or to stay silent or completely oppose. For example, it looks like the county is neutral on House Bill 2002, but I for one personally support the bill, and as the legislative body of the most racially and ethnically diverse counties in Oregon, or one of the counties in Oregon, we owe it to our constituents to engage in these courageous conversations and to talk about the implications of our action, and in this case, to our youth. So I just wanted to say that. I'll stop right there. Thank you for a great presentation.
Thank you, Commissioner. Well, with that, we are about 8 minutes or so early. Thank you, Commissioners. Thank you, Chair.
And here you weren't sure if you'd be able to get through it all in 60 minutes, right? I think that's just a sign of how the three of you and Latricia are doing great work in engaging with us, in getting us the information we need, as well as working with the departments. So I'm really looking forward to hearing back from you. Probably, well, we don't have a meeting March 23rd, but I'll be paying attention to your government relations update memos after that March 19th deadline for sure. So I've got a good understanding of really what you're dealing with on our behalf and how things winnow down from there to the next milestone in April. I do realize that all of you have been working very hard in navigating the many different special sessions and e-board meetings through the latter part of 2020. So thank you for being a real exemplary team. I appreciate it. And I also appreciate your good information to help me be on that journey with you. So go team, go. Any other commissioner comments? Commissioner Willie, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo some of that as well, Chair, that I appreciate the GR team, especially always being very responsive to my requests about information on specific bills that I get questions from constituents on, and certainly always the way you follow up. So I agree, you're doing a great job. Lots and lots of detail and information there, but I appreciate your support to my questions. So thank you for doing that.
Any other commissioner questions or comments at this point? Good work, everybody. Thumbs up.
Thank you, Chair and Board, for supporting our team.
All righty. So at this juncture, we will move over to our business meeting, and we'll see you all at 10 o'clock, and our work session will reconvene at 1 o'clock. Thank you all.